The royal summons arrived at midnight, wrapped in black silk that smelled of wolfsbane and accusation. Ailsa stood in the doorway of her crumbling cottage, hands trembling as she broke the wax seal bearing the mark of the Alpha King himself. 3 words glowed silver on the parchment, burning themselves into her vision like hot iron against flesh. Ancestral right denied. Her Omega blood turned to ice. The council had ruled against her. After 17 years of exile, after every humiliation she'd endured in silence, they had stripped away the one thing that could never be taken from a firstborn daughter of the clan Macleith. Her inheritance, her father's lands, her very identity within the pack's sovereignty. The document slipped from her fingers, and somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness, a child whimpered. Not her child. Never her child. That was the cruelest twist of fate, wasn't it? That an Omega rejected by her own mate, deemed too weak to carry the heir of the realm, would find herself guardian to an abandoned toddler who bore the scent of something ancient and terrifying. Tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a warm hug. Ailsa pressed her palm against the cold stone wall, feeling the tremor that ran through her entire body. The rejection bond still ached in her chest like a wound that refused to close, even after 3 years. She could still remember the exact moment Ewan MacKillian, the alpha heir she'd been promised since childhood, had looked at her with those cold amber eyes and spoken the words that shattered her world. I cannot bind myself to damaged goods. You carry no strength in your bloodline. I reject you, Ailsa Macleith, before Moon and Pack. The ceremonial rejection had happened in front of the entire High Council, in the great hall of Craig Darroch, where every clan leader and their descendants had gathered to witness what should have been a blessed union. Instead, they'd witnessed her destruction. The humiliation hadn't ended there. It never ended for rejected Omegas. The pack laws were ancient and unforgiving. Without an alpha's protection, without a mate bond to anchor her status, Ailsa had been stripped of her clan name, her father's title, and her right to walk freely in pack lands. She'd been given this cottage on the border of the territory, so close to the wilderness that wolves from rival packs could smell her vulnerability on the night wind. For your protection, the council had said, their faces carefully neutral, but she'd seen the truth in their eyes. They'd wanted her forgotten, erased from pack history like a mistake that should never have been made. The daughter of Coinage Macleith, the legendary warrior who'd held the eastern border for 40 years, reduced to nothing more than a ghost story whispered among the younger wolves. But Ailsa had learned to survive in the shadows. She'd learned to hunt in the hour before dawn when the world hung between darkness and light, when even the strongest alphas were too drowsy to notice a lone Omega moving through the forest. She'd learned to mask her scent with bitter herbs and ash, to walk without sound, to endure the long winter nights when the cold seeped through every crack in the stone walls and the rejection bond burned like acid in her veins. And she'd learned that survival meant accepting help from no one, trusting no one, expecting nothing from the pack that had cast her aside like refuse. Then, 6 months ago, everything had changed. Ailsa had found the child during one of her hunts, barely conscious, lying in a snowdrift near the old standing stones that marked the boundary between pack lands and the wild. A little girl, no more than 3 years old, with tangled dark hair and eyes that shifted between brown and gold depending on the light. She'd been wrapped in nothing but a torn linen shift, her tiny body blue with cold, her lips forming wordless pleas that no sound could carry. Ailsa had known immediately that this was no ordinary child. The scent that rose from her skin was wrong, layered with something that made every instinct in Ailsa's Omega nature scream warnings. Ancient power. Forbidden lineage. Blood that should not exist within the boundaries of pack sovereignty. She should have left the child there. Should have turned and walked away, letting the wild claim what was clearly born of forbidden magic. But when those strange eyes had locked onto hers, when those tiny frozen fingers had reached up with such desperate trust, Ailsa had felt something crack open inside her chest. Something beyond the rejection bond, beyond the constant ache of being unwanted and unmated. She'd gathered the child into her arms, wrapped her in her own cloak, and carried her home through the snow. And in doing so, she'd sealed her own fate without knowing it. The child never spoke. Not in 6 months had Ailsa heard a single word from those rosebud lips, though the girl clearly understood everything said to her. Ailsa had named her Sorka, meaning Bright One, because despite everything, the child's presence had brought an unexpected light into the darkness of exile. Sorka was intelligent, eerily so for her age. She knew when to hide when other wolves passed too close to the cottage. She knew how to stay silent during the council inspections that came twice a season, when the clan enforcers would walk through the exile territories to ensure no one was plotting rebellion. And she knew, somehow, when Ailsa was in pain from the rejection bond, curling her small body against Ailsa's side and placing one warm palm over her heart until the agony subsided to a bearable throb. But tonight something was wrong. Ailsa could feel it in the way the wind had shifted direction 3 times in the past hour, carrying scents that shouldn't be present this close to winter's end. Ashen blood. Burning silver. The distinct musk of alpha warriors on the hunt. And beneath it all something else. Something that made her omega instincts rise up in a confusing mixture of terror and recognition. She moved through the darkened cottage, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor, to the small alcove where Sorka slept on a pallet of dried heather and wool blankets. The child was burning with fever. Ailsa's breath caught in her throat as she pressed her hand to Sorka's forehead, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from her small body. This wasn't a normal illness. The child's skin glowed faintly in the darkness, a pale luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with her racing heartbeat. And her scent had changed. No longer masked by the herbal tinctures Ailsa had been carefully applying to hide the strange magic that clung to her. Now it rose from her like smoke from sacred flames, thick and undeniable, carrying notes that would draw every predator within miles. "No, no, no," Ailsa whispered, panic clawing up her throat. She'd kept Sorka hidden for 6 months, had been so careful to mask every trace of her presence, and now this. Whatever magic lay dormant in the child's blood was waking up, and there would be no hiding it. The council would come. Ewan would come. And when they discovered that Ailsa had been harboring a child of forbidden lineage, the punishment would be worse than exile. It would be death. Sorka's eyes fluttered open, glowing softly gold in the darkness. Her small hand reached up and gripped Ailsa's wrist with surprising strength, and for the first time in 6 months, the child tried to speak. The sound that emerged was barely a whisper, rough and unpracticed, but it froze Ailsa's blood. "Mother comes. Father hunts. Blood calls to blood." Before Ailsa could respond, before she could even begin to process those impossible words, a howl split the night. Not the common sound of wolves greeting the moon, but the deep, resonant call of an alpha asserting dominance. The kind of howl that demanded submission from every omega within earshot. Ailsa felt her knees weaken, felt her body trying to sink to the floor in the instinctive response that had been bred into her bloodline for 1,000 generations. She fought it, gripping the edge of Sorka's palate, forcing herself to remain upright. Another howl answered the first, this one closer. Then another and another, until the night was filled with the sound of a full hunting pack converging on her location. Through the cottage's single window, Ailsa saw the flicker of torches between the trees, dozens of them, moving with purpose toward her door. The pack had come for Sorka. But how had they known? The royal summons. The denial of her ancestral right. It had all been a distraction, a way to occupy her mind while they moved into position. They'd known about Sorka all along, had been watching and waiting for the child's power to manifest. And Ailsa, fool that she was, had played right into their hands. She moved with the speed born of desperation, gathering Sorka into her arms despite the child's burning fever. The girl was too hot to hold comfortably, her skin almost searing, but Ailsa pressed her close and moved toward the back of the cottage where a narrow passage led down into the root cellar. It was a poor hiding place, one the pack would find within minutes, but it was all she had. She'd barely made it 3 steps when the cottage door exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a force that sent splinters of wood flying across the room. Ewan MacKillian stood in the doorway, and Ailsa's traitorous heart stuttered at the sight of him. 3 years hadn't diminished his power or his beauty. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broader, his presence so overwhelmingly alpha that the air itself seemed to bend around him. His dark red hair was pulled back from a face carved from the same stone as the ancient mountains, all sharp angles and harsh planes softened only by the cruel curve of his mouth. Those amber eyes found her immediately, and something flickered in their depths that might have been regret if she'd been foolish enough to believe he possessed such an emotion. "Give me the child, Ailsa." His voice rolled through the cottage like distant thunder, layered with the alpha command that made her omega nature scream at her to obey. "This doesn't have to end with your blood on my hands." She backed away, clutching Sorka tighter. The child had gone silent again, but her small fingers dug into Ailsa's shoulder hard enough to draw blood. "You have no right to her," Ailsa managed to say, though her voice shook. "She's under my protection." "Your protection." Ewan stepped fully into the cottage, and 6 more wolves followed him, all of them enforcers bearing the Makkalian clan mark. "You have no authority to offer protection, Ailsa. You barely have the right to exist within Packlands. You're a rejected Omega harboring a child of dark magic, and the punishment for such a crime is—" "I know what the punishment is." The words burst from her with more force than she'd intended, making several of the enforcers exchange glances. "I've lived every moment of the past 3 years knowing exactly what I am and what I'm not allowed to be. But this child is innocent. She was abandoned, left to die in the cold, and I saved her. That gives me a claim under the old laws, under the rights of mercy that even the council can't dismiss." A muscle twitched in Ewan's jaw. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the scent that had once driven her omega nature wild with desire. Cedarwood and storm wind, and something uniquely him that made the rejection bond flare with fresh agony. "The rights of mercy don't apply to creatures of forbidden lineage," he said quietly, and there was something in his tone that sent ice down her spine. "This child isn't what you think she is. She isn't even fully wolf." "Then what is she?" Ailsa demanded, hating how her voice cracked. "An abomination." The new voice came from behind Ewan, and the crowd of enforcers parted to reveal a woman Ailsa recognized with a sick jolt of shock. Morag Makkalian, Ewan's mother, the Luna of the pack and one of the most powerful alphas in the entire realm. She was tall and imposing, her silver hair braided in the complex patterns that denoted her status, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Sorka with an expression of cold calculation. "That child carries the bloodline of the Fealad, the ancient ones who were cast out of Pack sovereignty 500 years ago for attempting to overthrow the natural order. Her very existence is a threat to everything we've built." Ailsa felt Sorka trembling against her, felt the fever heat rising even higher, and something inside her made a decision that transcended logic or survival instinct. "Then you'll have to kill me to get to her," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Because I'm not giving her up." Morag's laugh was brittle and sharp. "You would die for a creature you found 6 months ago. A child who isn't even your blood." She moved forward, each step measured and deliberate. "I always knew you were weak, Ailsa Mackleith. It's why I counseled my son to reject you. An Omega who can't even put Pack sovereignty above misplaced maternal instinct has no place in our bloodline." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to wound, to make Ailsa feel small and worthless and wrong. And they worked. For a moment, she felt herself wavering, felt the old shame rising up to choke her. But then Sorka's small hand pressed against her chest, right over her heart where the rejection bond ached, and suddenly the pain lessened. Not disappeared, but softened into something bearable. The child was doing something, using whatever strange power lived in her blood to ease Ailsa's suffering, and it was that act of innocent compassion that steeled her resolve. "I'm weak," Ailsa agreed quietly, looking Morag directly in the eye. "I'm a rejected Omega with no clan, no mate, no status. But I'm also the only person in this room who saw a dying child and chose to save her instead of walking away. If that makes me weak, then I'll wear that weakness with pride." For a long moment no one moved. The cottage was filled with tension so thick it seemed to pulse in the air like a living thing. Then Ewan made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a sigh, and Ailsa saw his hand move toward the blade at his hip. He was actually going to do it. He was going to kill her right here, right now, and take Sorka for whatever dark purpose the council had planned. But before he could draw the weapon, a new sound cut through the night. A howl, but unlike any Ailsa had heard before. It was deeper than the alpha call, older, layered with harmonics that made her bones vibrate and her vision blur at the edges. Every wolf in the cottage froze, their eyes going wide, and even Morag's expression shifted from cold confidence to something that might have been fear. "Impossible," Ewan breathed. "He never comes to the borders." "Who?" Ailsa demanded, but she already knew. There was only one wolf whose howl could command that kind of reaction. Only one presence that could make even the Luna's certainty crumble. "The Alpha King," Morag said, and her voice had lost all its sharp edges. "Alistair Macbetha has answered the child's call." The name sent shockwaves through Ailsa's entire being. Alistair Macbetha, the Alpha King who ruled over all the northern packs, who hadn't been seen beyond the walls of his fortress in nearly a decade, who was said to be so ancient and powerful that even speaking his name required careful consideration. Stories about him were whispered in the same breath as legends about the old gods, and most wolves went their entire lives without ever crossing his path. He was judge, executioner, and absolute law, a creature of such concentrated power that his mere presence could force submission from every alpha in the realm. And he was coming here. For Sorka. Ailsa's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Why would the Alpha King himself respond to a child's fevered magic? What connection could possibly exist between an abandoned toddler and the most powerful wolf alive? Sorka's earlier words crashed back into her consciousness. Mother comes. Father hunts. Blood calls to blood. Couldn't be. The Alpha King had no known heir, no mate, no connections beyond the pack's sovereignty. He ruled with absolute authority. But as the howl echoed again, closer now, close enough that Ailsa could feel it reverberating through the stone beneath her feet, she looked down at Sorka's burning face and saw the truth written in those strange gold-shifting eyes. "She's his daughter," Ailsa whispered, and the cottage erupted into chaos. Ewan moved first, lunging toward her with speed that no Omega could hope to counter, but Ailsa was already moving, instinct guiding her toward the root cellar passage, even as she knew it was futile. She made it 2 steps before his hand closed around her arm. His grip iron-strong, spinning her back to face him. Sorka cried out, a wordless sound of distress that sent several of the enforcers stumbling backward with their hands pressed to their ears. "Let her go." Morag's voice cut through the noise, sharp with command. "If the king is coming, we can't be seen harming what's his." But Ewan didn't release his grip. His amber eyes were locked on Ailsa's face, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Not anger, not even determination. Something darker and more complicated. Something that looked almost like anguish. "You don't understand," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "If he takes the child, you'll never see her again. She'll disappear into Duan Bede, and whatever life you've given her these past 6 months will be nothing but a memory." "Is that what you want?" "What I want." The laugh that escaped Ailsa was sharp and broken. "When have I ever gotten what I want? You made sure of that 3 years ago." His grip tightened, and she felt claws press against her skin, not breaking through but threatening to. "I did what was necessary for the pack. You were too weak to carry strong pups, too soft to survive the political maneuvering of the High Council. I saved you from a life of misery." "You destroyed me," Ailsa whispered, and felt something inside her chest crack wider. "You destroyed me in front of everyone I'd ever known, took away my name and my home and every dream I'd dared to hold. And now you tell me it was for my own good. That you were protecting me." "Yes." The word was fierce, almost desperate. "Because if I hadn't rejected you, they would have. The council wanted you gone, Ailsa. They saw your father's legacy in you, saw the way the other Omegas looked to you for guidance, and they feared what you might become. I rejected you publicly so that you'd have the mercy of exile instead of execution. I gave you life, even if that life was lived in shadows." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Ailsa couldn't process. Before she could respond, before she could even begin to untangle the truth from the lies, the cottage door exploded inward for a second time. But this time, there was no wood splintering or hinges tearing free. The door simply ceased to exist, disintegrating into motes of silver light that hung in the air like dust motes caught in moonlight. And through that impossible entrance walked Alistair Macbetha. He was nothing like the legends described, and yet somehow exactly what Ailsa's Omega instincts knew he would be. Tall, yes, but not monstrously so. Broad-shouldered but not bulky. His hair was dark as a winter midnight, shot through with streaks of silver that seemed to glow with their own light. His face was ageless, neither young nor old, carved from shadows and starlight into something that transcended conventional beauty and became something else entirely. Terrible, magnetic, utterly inhuman in its perfection. But it was his eyes that held Ailsa frozen in place. They were the same shade as Sorka's when her power stirred, that impossible shifting gold that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Ancient eyes that had seen the rise and fall of kingdoms, that held secrets no mortal wolf should possess. And they were fixed on Sorka with an intensity that made the air itself seem to shimmer. Every wolf in the cottage dropped to their knees, heads bowed, exposing their throats in the ultimate gesture of submission. Even Morag, powerful Luna that she was, bent before him without hesitation. Ewan's grip on Ailsa's arm vanished as he too sank down, his entire body trembling with the effort of resisting the command that radiated from the king's mere presence. Only Ailsa remained standing, held upright by pure stubbornness and the child in her arms. She should submit. Every instinct in her Omega nature screamed at her to bare her throat, to acknowledge the absolute dominance of the Alpha King. But Sorka's fevered heat against her chest, the small fingers digging into her shoulder, reminded her that she was the only thing standing between this child and whatever fate awaited her in the king's fortress. Alistair's gaze shifted from Sorka to Ailsa, and she felt the weight of it like a physical force trying to drive her to her knees. She locked her legs, locked her jaw, and met those terrible golden eyes with as much courage as she could summon. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they stared at each other across the ruined cottage. Then, impossibly, the corner of the king's mouth twitched upward. "Interesting," he said, and his voice was like distant thunder rolling across ancient mountains. "A rejected Omega who dares to meet my eyes. Either you're remarkably brave or catastrophically foolish." "Both," Ailsa managed to say, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. "But I won't give her up without knowing she'll be safe." "Safe." Alistair moved closer, each step measured and deliberate, and the silver motes that had once been the door swirled around him like living things. "You presume to lecture me about the safety of my own daughter?" So it was true. The confirmation should have terrified her, should have made her drop Sorka and run for her life. Instead, Ailsa felt a strange calm settle over her. "Your daughter was dying in a snowdrift when I found her," she said quietly. "Abandoned at the boundary stones, wrapped in rags, barely conscious. If she's yours, where were you 6 months ago?" The temperature in the cottage plummeted. Frost formed on the stone walls, and Ailsa saw her breath mist in the suddenly frigid air. The wolves still kneeling on the floor began to shake, whether from cold or fear she couldn't tell. Ewan made a sound that might have been a warning or a plea, but Ailsa ignored him. She'd already crossed so many lines tonight that one more wouldn't matter. "Careful, Omega," Alistair said, and now there was no hint of amusement in his voice. "You speak of matters you don't understand. Then help me understand." Ailsa shifted Sorka's weight, feeling the child's burning fever seeping into her own skin. "Help me understand how a father allows his daughter to nearly die from exposure. Help me understand why she bears the mark of forbidden lineage if she's truly yours. Help me understand why, in 6 months, you never came looking for her." "Because I didn't know she existed until tonight." The admission came with such brutal honesty that it stole Ailsa's breath. Alistair stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the faint scars that marked his throat and jaw, evidence of battles fought long before she was born. Her mother kept the pregnancy hidden from me, gave birth in secret, and then... His voice caught, the first sign of emotion she'd seen in him. And then she did what she thought necessary to protect our daughter from my enemies. She abandoned her, Ailsa said flatly. In the middle of winter. At the boundary stones where anything could have found her. She placed her where an Omega with a kind heart might find her. Alistair's eyes fixed on Ailsa with unsettling intensity. Where someone who knew the pain of rejection might recognize a child in need and choose compassion over self-preservation. My mate knew you, Ailsa Macleith. She watched you from the shadows, saw how you survived your exile, and trusted that you would do for our daughter what she could not. The words crashed into Ailsa like a wave, washing away every assumption she'd built about Sorka's origins. Who was she? She demanded. Who would do such a thing? Someone who loved our daughter enough to give her up rather than watch her become a pawn in the games the High Council plays. Alistair's expression darkened. Someone who understood that carrying the bloodline of the Alpha King makes you a target for every ambitious wolf seeking power. And someone who paid the ultimate price for trying to protect what we created. Is she? Ailsa couldn't finish the question. Dead. Yes. The word fell between them like a stone into still water. Murdered 3 months ago by wolves loyal to a faction that seeks to replace me. They found her despite all her precautions, tortured her for information about our daughter's location, and when she refused to break, they killed her slowly enough that I felt her death through our bond from 100 miles away. Ailsa's arms tightened around Sorka reflexively. I'm sorry, she whispered, meaning it with everything in her. Your sorrow is noted and appreciated, but it changes nothing. Alistair extended his hand, palm up, in a gesture that was somehow both command and plea. My daughter's power is waking. You've felt it tonight, seen how her fever burns and her scent carries. Within days, every wolf in the realm will know she exists, and the same ones who killed her mother will come for her. I can protect her in Duanbe, the behind walls that have stood for 1,000 years. You cannot protect her here. He was right. Ailsa knew he was right. Her cottage was barely defensible against common wolves, let alone whatever dark forces the king's enemies could bring to bear. But the thought of handing Sorka over, of watching her disappear into a fortress she'd never see, of becoming just another footnote in the child's story, was like a blade twisting in her chest. Will she remember me? The question escaped before Ailsa could stop it, small and broken and pathetic. Something shifted in Alistair's expression, softening the terrible inhuman beauty into something almost mortal. You've been her mother for 6 months, he said quietly. Fed her, sheltered her, kept her safe when every instinct probably told you to turn her in. Do you truly think she'll forget that? I'm not her mother, Ailsa said, even as Sorka's fingers dug deeper into her shoulder. Her mother is dead. I'm just the Omega who bled all night to keep a toddler warm. Alistair's words stopped her cold. Yes, I know about that. The night 3 weeks ago when the last of your firewood ran out and the temperature dropped below freezing. The night you wrapped your daughter in every blanket you owned and then shifted into your wolf form and curled around her, letting your body heat keep her alive even as the cold seeped into your bones and made your rejection bond burn like acid in your veins. The night you nearly died from hypothermia rather than let her suffer. Ailsa's throat closed. She hadn't known anyone saw that night, hadn't realized that her sacrifice had been witnessed. She was cold, she whispered. I had to. You bled, Alistair interrupted, taking another step closer. Your wolf form couldn't maintain itself in that temperature, not with a rejection bond draining your strength. Your body started breaking down, hemorrhaging internally from the stress. But you held on until dawn, until the sun rose and brought enough warmth for her to survive. And when I caught your scent on the morning wind, when I smelled Omega blood mixed with protective magic and desperate love, I knew exactly where my daughter had been all this time. Ailsa felt tears burning in her eyes and hated herself for the weakness. If you knew, why did you wait? Why didn't you come immediately? Because I needed to know who you were, Alistair said. Needed to understand what kind of wolf would sacrifice herself for a child she'd found in the snow. Needed to verify that you weren't part of some elaborate trap set by my enemies. And most importantly, needed to give my daughter time to bond with the Omega who saved her life, because without that bond, she'll never trust anyone again. The implication behind his words slowly penetrated through Ailsa's emotional turmoil. What are you saying? I'm saying that when I take my daughter back to Duanbeath, you're coming with us. Alistair spoke as if it were already decided, as if her opinion on the matter was merely a formality. I'm saying that Sorcha needs you, and despite what you may think, you need her too. That rejection bond in your chest is killing you slowly, Ailsa MacLeith. I can smell the poison it's spreading through your system. Within a year, maybe two, it will destroy you completely. But my daughter's magic can soothe it, can't it? When she touches you, the pain lessens. Ailsa wanted to deny it, wanted to maintain some shred of independence, but the truth was written in the relief she felt every time Sorcha pressed her small hand against her heart. Yes, she admitted. But that doesn't mean. It means you're bound to her as surely as any mate bond. Alistair's golden eyes bore into her. It means that whatever life you thought you'd live in this cottage, whatever solitary existence you'd planned, ended the moment you chose to save her. My daughter has claimed you, Omega. And when a child of my bloodline claims someone, that claim is absolute. The words should have terrified her. Should have felt like chains being locked around her wrists, like another form of imprisonment replacing her exile. But instead, Ailsa felt something inside her chest unclench for the first time in 3 years. I don't understand, she whispered. You will. Alistair finally lowered his extended hand, seeming to accept that she wouldn't simply hand Sorcha over. Come with me to Duanbeath. Not as a servant, not as a prisoner, but as my daughter's guardian. Live in the royal apartments, eat at the high table, walk through halls where rejected Omegas are usually forbidden to tread. And in exchange, continue doing what you've been doing since the moment you found her. Love her. Protect her. Be the mother she lost. It was too much. Too overwhelming. Ailsa looked down at Sorcha, seeing the child's strange eyes watching her with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so young. What do you want? She asked the toddler quietly. Do you want to go with your father? Sorcha's small hand moved from Ailsa's shoulder to her cheek, and for the second time that night, the child spoke in that rough, unpracticed voice. Want to stay with you. Want father too. Want family. The simple honesty of it broke something inside Ailsa. Broke it and remade it into something new. Something that didn't fit the shape of the rejected Omega she'd spent 3 years learning to be. She looked back up at Alistair, seeing him with new eyes. Not as the terrifying Alpha King of legend, but as a father who'd lost his mate and was trying desperately to protect his daughter. If I come, she said slowly, I need to know that you won't separate us. That you won't decide one day that I'm not good enough or strong enough or worthy enough, and send me away. I am the Alpha King, Alistair said, and his voice held the weight of absolute authority. I do not break my word once it's given. If you come with me, if you accept the role of guardian to my daughter, then you will have my protection for as long as you draw breath. No one, not Morag MacCailian, not my council, not even Ewan who still believes he has some claim on you, will be able to touch you. You'll be untouchable, Omega. Sacred. As valuable to me as my daughter herself, because you are what keeps her safe when I cannot. Ailsa turned to look at Ewan, still kneeling with the others, and saw the devastation written across his face. He'd rejected her to save her, or so he claimed, and now she was being offered something he could never have imagined. Protection. Status. A place in the king's household that would make her more powerful than any Luna in the realm. The irony was almost too perfect. I accept, she said, and felt the words seal something fundamental in her soul. I accept the role of guardian. I accept your protection. And I accept that my life is now bound to your daughter's. Alistair's smile was sharp and satisfied. Then it's done. He turned to address the wolves still kneeling in submission. Let it be known that Ailsa MacLeith is under my personal protection, invested with the authority to speak for my daughter until she comes of age. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or attempts to undermine her position answers directly to me. Is that understood?" A chorus of "Yes, Alpha King" filled the cottage, the voices shaking with fear and respect. Morag was the first to rise, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Ailsa with an expression that promised future complications. "This is unprecedented," she said carefully. "A rejected Omega with no clan, no status, given such authority." "Is my decision to make," Alistair interrupted smoothly. "Do you question my judgment, Luna MacCailian?" "Never, Alpha King." Morag's submission was flawless, but Ailsa saw the calculation in her eyes. This wasn't over. The Luna would be planning, scheming, looking for ways to undermine what had just been established. But for now there was nothing she could do. Ewan rose last, his amber eyes meeting Ailsa's across the crowded cottage. She saw hurt there and anger and something that might have been longing. "Congratulations," he said, and his voice was carefully neutral. "You've managed to accomplish in 6 months what you couldn't in 17 years. You've made yourself indispensable." The barb was meant to wound, and it did. But Ailsa lifted her chin and met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't try to become indispensable," she said quietly. "I just tried to keep a child alive. It's remarkable what becomes possible when you stop caring about status and start caring about survival." Before Ewan could respond, Alistair moved between them, a clear statement of protection that made the former Alpha heir take a step back. "MacCailian, your presence is no longer required. Return to your clan and inform them that the matter of the forbidden child has been resolved. There will be no hunt, no execution, no further discussion. The king has spoken." It was a dismissal that couldn't be argued with. Ewan's jaw tightened, but he inclined his head in submission and turned to leave. As he passed Ailsa, he paused just long enough to whisper, "I hope you know what you've done." The games played in Duanbe that make clan politics look like children's squabbles. "You're walking into a nest of vipers, and this time I can't protect you." Then he was gone, taking the enforcers with him, leaving only Morag lingering by the door. The Luna regarded Ailsa with cold appraisal before speaking directly to Alistair. "Alpha King, if I may offer counsel." "You may not," Alistair said flatly. "Your opinion on this matter is neither sought nor valued. However, I do have a task for you. The Omega's cottage will need to be maintained in her absence. See to it that her possessions are preserved and that no one disturbs her property. She may wish to return here from time to time." Morag's expression flickered with surprise before smoothing back to careful neutrality. "As you command, Alpha King." She swept one last look over Ailsa, measuring and cold, before departing into the night. The cottage suddenly felt enormous in their absence, just the three of them remaining amid the scattered evidence of forced entry and royal intrusion. Ailsa became acutely aware that she was standing before the Alpha King in nothing but her night shift. Her hair unbound and wild, her feet bare on the cold stone. She should feel exposed, vulnerable, ashamed. Instead, she felt strangely calm, as if some fundamental truth about her existence had clicked into place. "We should leave before dawn," Alistair said, moving to examine what remained of his demolished door. "The journey to Duanbe will take 3 days at human pace, but we can make it in 1 if we run. Can you shift while carrying the child?" Ailsa shook her head. "My wolf form is unstable. The rejection bond damaged something in my ability to transform. I haven't successfully shifted in over a year." Alistair frowned, and for the first time, she saw genuine concern cross his features. "That's worse than I thought. The bond is consuming you from the inside out." He seemed to consider something, then nodded as if reaching a decision. "We'll travel by carriage then. I'll send word ahead to have one prepared." "A carriage?" Ailsa couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "You're the Alpha King. Can't you just run there in an hour and arrive looking like I conquered nations?" Alistair's mouth quirked. "Yes, but you and my daughter cannot, and I'll not arrive at my fortress without both of you. Whatever status I'm granting you begins now, Omega. You don't walk behind me or follow at a distance. You travel as my daughter's guardian, with all the dignity and protection that role entails. The simple respect in his words made Ailsa's throat tighten. She'd grown so accustomed to being treated as less than, as something to be hidden and ashamed of, that basic courtesy felt like an overwhelming gift. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me yet," Alistair said, and something dark crossed his expression. "The protection I'm offering comes with a price you don't yet understand. The fortress is filled with wolves who will see you as a threat, an outsider, an Omega who's risen above her station. They will test you, push you, look for any weakness they can exploit. And they'll do it with smiles and kind words and poisoned wine at dinner." "Then why bring me at all?" Ailsa asked. "Why not just take Sorka and leave me here?" "Because she needs you." Alistair's golden eyes held hers. "Because in 6 months, you've given her something I never could. Safety without conditions. Love without political calculation. A mother's protection that asks nothing in return. I'm ancient, Omega, and powerful beyond most wolves' comprehension, but I cannot be what she needs most. You already are." The admission, spoken with such raw honesty, made Ailsa's eyes burn with unshed tears. She looked down at Sorka, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep in her arms, the fever finally breaking as her small body relaxed into Ailsa's warmth. "I don't know how to be what she needs in your world," Ailsa confessed. "I barely survived in mine." "Then learn," Alistair said simply. "Learn and adapt and become stronger than you've ever been. Because my enemies are already moving, already planning, and when they discover that my daughter lives, they'll come for her with everything they have. And you, Omega, will be standing between them and her. So I need you strong. I need you sharp. And I need you absolutely committed to her survival above all else, even your own." "I already am," Ailsa said, and knew it was true. "I was committed the moment I chose to carry her home through the snow instead of leaving her to die. Everything after that has just been confirmation." "Good." Alistair moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. "One more thing. Induan B. You'll be given quarters adjacent to my daughter's. You'll take your meals with the royal household. And you'll be expected to attend council meetings when her welfare is discussed. This means you'll be in close proximity to me on a daily basis. Can you handle that?" Ailsa blinked, confused by the question. "Why would that be a problem?" "Because I'm unmated," Alistair said bluntly. "And you're an Omega with a rejection bond that's left you vulnerable to alpha influence. The proximity might trigger instincts in you that you'd rather not feel. I need to know you can maintain boundaries." Heat flooded Ailsa's cheeks as she understood his meaning. "I spent 3 years learning to suppress every instinct my Omega nature demanded. I can handle being near an unmated alpha without turning into some kind of mindless." "That's not what I meant," Alistair interrupted quietly. "I meant that your Omega nature will seek to replace what was lost. The rejection bond left a void in you, and nature abhors a vacuum. Your instincts will try to fill that void with the nearest available alpha, and I happen to be the most powerful one you'll ever encounter. It's not a reflection on your character or your strength. It's just biology being cruel." The explanation, given with such clinical detachment, somehow made it worse. Because he was right, and Ailsa could already feel it starting. The way her Omega nature had stirred when he'd first walked through the door. The way her body had responded to his scent even as her mind remained focused on protecting Sorka. The way some deep, primitive part of her was already whispering that this alpha was strong, capable, powerful enough to protect her and her daughter. Well, not her daughter. His daughter. She had to remember that. "I'll manage," Ailsa said firmly, pushing down the treacherous whispers of her Omega instincts. "I've survived worse than inconvenient biology." Alistair studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her brave words to the uncertainty beneath. But he simply nodded and said, "The carriage will be here within the hour. Pack what you need for the journey. Everything else will be sent for later." He stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving Ailsa alone with a sleeping child in her arms and a future she couldn't begin to comprehend. She looked around her cottage, this small cold space that had been her entire world for 3 years, and felt the strangest sense of loss mixed with relief. She was leaving behind her exile, her loneliness, her daily struggle to survive. But she was also leaving behind the last remnants of the life she'd thought she'd live. The clan she'd been born into. The pack's sovereignty she'd been raised to serve. The simple dream of being a mated Omega with a family of her own. All of it was gone now, burned away by the choices she'd made and the child she'd chosen to save. And in its place was something new and terrifying and impossibly strange. A role she'd never prepared for. A position she had no right to hold. And a connection to the Alpha King that would either save her or destroy her completely. Ailsa moved through the cottage on silent feet, gathering the few possessions worth taking. Her mother's shawl, worn thin but still carrying the faint scent of the woman who died giving birth to her. Her father's hunting knife, the blade etched with the Macleith clan mark that she was no longer allowed to claim. A small collection of herbs and tinctures that helped mask Sorka's scent and soothe her own pain. And finally, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, the one thing she'd kept hidden from every inspection and council visit. A letter her father had written to her the day before he died, telling her that no matter what happened, no matter what the pack said or did, she was worthy of love and belonging. She pressed the letter to her chest, feeling the old paper crinkle beneath her fingers, and allowed herself one moment of grief for the father who'd believed in her when no one else did. Then she carefully tucked it into her traveling bag and forced herself to move forward. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Not when Sorka's life depended on her staying strong. By the time the royal carriage arrived, Ailsa had changed into her best dress, which was still patched and faded but at least clean, and had Sorka bundled in warm blankets. The child was awake again, her fever fully broken, those strange gold-shifting eyes watching everything with unnerving intelligence. As Ailsa carried her outside, Sorka's small hand reached out to touch her cheek in a gesture that had become familiar over the past 6 months. "Safe," the child whispered. And though Ailsa didn't know if Sorka was reassuring her or seeking reassurance herself, she nodded. "Safe," she agreed, even though she had no idea if it was true. The carriage was like nothing Ailsa had ever seen. Black lacquered wood inlaid with silver designs that seemed to move in the pre-dawn light, depicting wolves running beneath stars that actually twinkled. The interior was lined with soft furs and cushioned seats that looked like they'd never known the touch of poverty or cold. 2 massive wolves, both clearly alpha in their bearing, stood guard at the front, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Alistair appeared from the shadows, having shifted back to human form at some point. He was dressed in dark traveling clothes that somehow made him look even more imposing than before, and Ailsa felt her traitorous Omega nature stir at the sight of him. She ruthlessly suppressed it, climbing into the carriage with Sorka and settling into one of the cushioned seats. Alistair climbed in across from her, filling the space with his presence in a way that made the generous interior suddenly feel intimate. He rapped twice on the carriage roof, and they began to move, leaving the cottage and the life Ailsa had known behind. For a long time, they traveled in silence, the only sound the rhythmic creak of wheels and the soft breathing of the child sleeping against Ailsa's chest. The sun rose slowly, painting the winter landscape in shades of gold and rose, and Ailsa watched her old territory disappear behind them with mixed emotions. She was heading toward something unknown, possibly dangerous, potentially devastating. But she was also heading toward possibility, toward a life that might contain more than just survival. "Tell me about her mother," Ailsa said quietly, breaking the silence. "Tell me about the woman who trusted me with her daughter." Alistair was quiet for so long that Ailsa thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Her name was Catriona. She was a healer from a minor clan. No political ambitions, no desire for power or status. I met her when she was called to Duanbetha to treat an illness that had struck my guard. She was the first person in centuries who looked at me and saw not the Alpha King, but just a wolf who was tired and lonely and human beneath all the power and legend." The pain in his voice was palpable, and Ailsa felt her heart ache in sympathy. "How long were you together?" "For years. We kept it secret because I knew what would happen if the council discovered I'd taken a mate with no political value. They would have demanded I reject her and choose someone more suitable. Someone who could bring alliances and strengthen borders. So we met in shadows, loved in stolen moments, and pretended to the world that we were nothing to each other." He paused, his golden eyes distant. "When she told me she was pregnant, we both knew we couldn't hide it much longer. A child would be impossible to conceal. So we made plans to announce our bond, to claim our daughter publicly and dare anyone to challenge us. But something went wrong," Ailsa guessed. "Someone found out before we could make our announcement. Someone who saw an opportunity in our secret and moved to exploit it. They threatened to kill Catriona and the child unless I abdicated the throne. And when I refused, when I told them I'd burn the entire realm to ash before I'd give up my power, His voice cracked. "They sent me her finger. Just her finger, wrapped in cloth stained with her blood, with a note that said they'd send the rest of her piece by piece unless I stepped down." Ailsa's hand flew to her mouth, horror washing through her. "What did you do?" "What any alpha would do. I hunted them, tracked them to their stronghold and killed every single wolf who'd been part of the plot. But by the time I found where they'd been keeping Catriona, she was gone. She'd escaped somehow, badly injured but alive, and vanished so completely that even I couldn't find her. I spent months searching, following every lead, every rumor, but it was like she'd simply ceased to exist." "She was hiding," Ailsa said quietly. "Hiding and healing and protecting your daughter." "Yes, and she did it brilliantly. So brilliantly that when my enemies finally found her 3 months ago, they had to torture her for days to get any information. And even then, she told them nothing. She died protecting Sorka, died keeping her location secret, died trusting that wherever she'd left our daughter, whoever she'd chosen to care for her would be enough." The carriage rolled on through the winter morning, carrying them toward a fortress and a future neither of them could fully predict. Ailsa held Sorka closer, feeling the weight of Catriona's trust like a sacred charge. This woman, this healer who'd loved the Alpha King in secret and paid the ultimate price for it, had chosen Ailsa to protect her daughter. Had seen something in a rejected Omega that made her believe Ailsa was worthy of such faith. "I won't let her down," Ailsa whispered. "I won't let either of you down." Alistair's golden eyes fixed on her, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. "I know," he said simply. "That's why you're here." The rest of the journey passed in a blur of snow-covered forests and frozen rivers, of small villages where wolves stopped their morning routines to stare at the royal carriage with awe and fear. Ailsa dozed fitfully, her body exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the night, but her mind refused to completely rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ewan's hurt expression, heard Morag's calculating tone, felt the weight of Alistair's expectations settling on her shoulders like a mantle made of stone. They stopped once, at midday, so that Sorka could eat and Ailsa could tend to her needs. The child was remarkably well behaved considering the chaos of the past 12 hours, but Ailsa could see the confusion in those strange eyes. Sorka didn't understand where they were going or why, didn't comprehend that her entire life had shifted overnight. She only knew that Ailsa was still with her, still holding her, still whispering reassurances in her ear. "She trusts you completely," Alistair observed, watching them from a respectful distance. "In all my years, I've never seen a child bond so completely with someone who isn't blood." "Maybe that's because she knows I chose her," Ailsa said, settling Sorka back in her lap. "I wasn't obligated by blood or duty or pack law. I just chose her. Sometimes that matters more than any bond nature creates." "Perhaps." Alistair looked like he wanted to say something more, but instead, he simply gestured to the carriage. "We should continue. I want to arrive before nightfall." They traveled on, and as the afternoon shadows lengthened, Ailsa began to see evidence that they were entering the heart of the Alpha King's territory. The trees grew taller here, older, their branches reaching toward the sky like ancient guardians. The snow took on a silvery quality, as if touched by moon magic even in daylight. And the silence was absolute, the kind of deep stillness that spoke of power so profound that even nature itself bent to acknowledge it. Then, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they crested a hill and Ailsa saw Duen Beatha for the first time. It wasn't a fortress. It was a city carved from the mountain itself, rising from the stone in spiraling towers and sweeping walls that seemed to grow organically from the earth. Lights glowed in thousands of windows, casting patterns of gold and silver across the snow. And at the very top, where the mountain peak pierced the winter sky, stood a structure that could only be the royal residence. It glowed with an inner light that had nothing to do with candles or torches, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. "Welcome home," Alistair said quietly, and Ailsa realized with a jolt that he was speaking to both her and Sorka. The carriage descended the hill and entered the city through massive gates that opened at their approach without any visible guards. Wolves lined the streets, hundreds of them, all stopping their evening activities to watch the royal carriage pass. Ailsa saw the shock on their faces when they glimpsed her through the window, saw the confusion and speculation and, on some faces, outright hostility. A rejected Omega in the Alpha King's carriage. It was unprecedented, scandalous, utterly impossible by every law and tradition they knew. And yet here she was, holding the king's daughter, riding toward the royal residence as if she belonged there. The carriage climbed through winding streets until they reached the top of the city, where the royal residence towered above everything else. Up close, it was even more impressive, the walls etched with designs that seemed to tell stories in a language Ailsa didn't know how to read. The doors were massive slabs of dark wood bound with silver, and they swung open silently as the carriage approached. They entered a courtyard lit by braziers that burned with silver flames, and Ailsa felt her Omega nature respond to the sheer power radiating from the stone beneath her. This was the seat of the Alpha King's strength, the place where his authority was absolute and unquestionable. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to submit, to bare her throat, to acknowledge that she had no right to be here. But she didn't. She stepped out of the carriage with Sorka in her arms and her head held high, refusing to let them see her fear. A line of wolves waited in the courtyard, all of them dressed in the formal attire that spoke of rank and status. At their head stood a woman who could only be the king's first advisor, based on the elaborate braids in her silver hair and the clan marks covering her throat and arms. Her eyes were sharp as she assessed Ailsa, taking in every detail from her patched dress to her carefully neutral expression. "Alpha King," the woman said, bowing deeply. "Welcome home. We received your message and have prepared quarters for your guest as instructed." "Thank you, Fiona," Alistair said, moving to stand beside Ailsa in a clear statement of unity. "This is Ailsa Macleith, guardian to my daughter. She's to be afforded every courtesy and protection as if she were of royal blood herself." The shocked silence that followed was deafening. Ailsa saw jaws drop, saw eyes widen, saw the carefully maintained composure of the assembled wolves crack and shatter. The first advisor, Fiona, recovered first, her expression smoothing into professional neutrality. "Of course, Alpha King. We are honored to welcome Lady Ailsa to Duen Beatha." The title Lady was clearly an improvisation, a way to give Ailsa status that her rejected Omega nature didn't technically grant her. "Your quarters have been prepared in the East Wing, adjacent to the royal nursery. If you'll follow me." Ailsa glanced at Alistair, who nodded slightly. She followed Fiona into the royal residence, acutely aware of the stares burning into her back, the whispers that started the moment she was out of earshot. They were already judging her, already plotting how to remove her, already seeing her as a threat to the established order. But let them try. She'd survived exile, rejection, and 3 years of slow death from a bond that should have killed her by now. A few ambitious court wolves wouldn't break her. The quarters Fiona led her to were beyond anything Ailsa had imagined. A suite of rooms larger than her entire cottage, furnished with pieces that looked like they'd been crafted by artisans who understood that beauty could be functional. A massive bed draped in furs and silks. A sitting area with chairs arranged before a fireplace where flames already danced. And through an adjoining door, a smaller room set up as a nursery, with a tiny bed and toys and everything a child could need. "The nursery is magically warded," Fiona explained, her tone professional but not cold. "Nothing can harm the child within these walls. And your rooms are directly connected, so you'll hear if she needs you." She paused, then added in a lower voice, "I've served the Alpha King for 30 years. I've seen him face armies, negotiate with hostile clans, and rule with absolute authority. But I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you in that courtyard. Whatever happened between you, whatever arrangement you've made, I hope you understand the responsibility you've taken on." Ailsa met the older woman's eyes steadily. "I understand that a child's life depends on me. Everything else is secondary." Fiona's expression softened slightly. "Then perhaps you'll survive this after all." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Dinner is served in the great hall at sunset. You're expected to attend, seated at the high table with the king and his inner circle. I'd recommend changing into something more suitable. There's a wardrobe in the dressing room with clothes that should fit you." When Fiona left, Ailsa stood in the center of the lavish suite and felt the enormity of everything crash over her. She was here, in Duanbeatha, in rooms that were finer than anything she'd ever imagined. Expected to dine with the Alpha King and pretend she belonged among wolves who would see her as nothing but an opportunistic Omega who'd somehow manipulated her way into favor. Sorka stirred in her arms, those gold eyes blinking open sleepily. "Home," the child whispered. Ailsa looked around at the beautiful rooms, the expensive furnishings, the luxury that surrounded them. Then she looked down at the child in her arms and felt something settle in her chest. "Yes, sweetling," she murmured. "We're home." Even if that home was filled with vipers and political machinations and wolves who wanted her gone. Even if she had no idea how to navigate the treacherous waters she'd just plunged into. Even if the Alpha King's protection came with expectations and responsibilities that might destroy her. They were home. And Ailsa would burn the entire fortress down before she let anyone take that away from either of them. She settled Sorka in the nursery, watching as the child explored her new room with cautious wonder. Then Ailsa moved to the dressing room, where she found dozens of dresses in various styles and colors, all clearly expensive, all clearly chosen with her in mind. She selected a deep green gown that felt like liquid silk against her skin, the color bringing out the auburn highlights in her dark hair. It was modest enough to not draw accusations of impropriety, but fine enough to make a statement. She braided her hair in the complex pattern her mother had taught her, the style of the MacLeith clan, and fastened her father's knife at her hip beneath the folds of her dress. She might be a rejected Omega entering a den of political predators, but she was also Coinage MacLeith's daughter. And she would face them with all the dignity and courage he'd taught her to carry. The great hall was exactly as overwhelming as Ailsa had feared. It was vast, easily the size of her entire cottage multiplied by 50, with vaulted ceilings supported by columns carved to look like ancient trees. Tables filled the space, arranged in careful hierarchy that spoke volumes about pack structure and status. And at the far end, elevated above the rest, sat the high table where the Alpha King held court. Alistair was already seated when Ailsa arrived, and she felt his eyes track her progress across the hall as she made her way toward him. Every conversation stopped as she passed. Every wolf turned to stare at the rejected Omega in the fine green dress, walking toward the high table as if she had every right to be there. Ailsa kept her expression neutral, her steps measured and confident, refusing to show the fear churning in her gut. She reached the high table and stood there awkwardly, unsure of where she should sit or what protocol demanded. Alistair solved the problem by rising from his seat, an action that made the entire hall gasp, and pulling out the chair directly to his right. The position of highest honor, traditionally reserved for the king's mate or heir. "Sit," he said quietly, and it was both invitation and command. Ailsa sat, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes burning into her back. The message Alistair had just sent was impossible to miss. She wasn't here as a servant or a guest. She was here as someone important, someone worthy of respect and acknowledgement. and every wolf in the hall would have to adjust their expectations accordingly. That was perhaps overly dramatic, Fiona murmured from Alistair's left, though her tone held grudging approval. Drama serves a purpose in this place, Alistair replied, his voice pitched for only those at the high table to hear. Let them talk, let them speculate, and let them understand from the beginning that Ailsa is under my personal protection. The meal was an exercise in political theatre. Course after course arrived, each one more elaborate than the last, and Ailsa was acutely aware of how every bite she took was being observed and judged. The wolves seated near the high table made polite conversation, asking careful questions about her background, her clan, her relationship to the king's daughter. Ailsa answered honestly but minimally, revealing nothing that could be used against her later. She was halfway through the fourth course when she felt a presence behind her, too close to be comfortable, carrying a scent that made her omega nature bristle with instinctive wariness. She turned to find a tall alpha male standing there. His dark hair shot through with gray, his eyes assessing her with predatory interest. "Forgive the intrusion, Alpha King," the man said, though his eyes never left Ailsa's face. "I simply had to meet the Omega who's managed to capture your attention so thoroughly. I am Domhnall Macawid, head of the Northern Council." "Domhnall," Alistair acknowledged with a nod that held no warmth. "This is Ailsa Macleith, guardian to my daughter." "Yes, I've heard the whispers." Domhnall's smile was sharp. A rejected Omega given such high status. It's quite the scandal. Though I suppose scandals are nothing new in this hall. His eyes finally shifted to Alistair. "Tell me, Alpha King, what does the council think of this unprecedented appointment? Were they consulted?" The question was a challenge, carefully worded but unmistakable. Ailsa felt tension ripple through the high table, saw Fiona's hand move toward the knife at her hip. But Alistair merely smiled, and there was nothing warm or friendly in the expression. "The council," he said softly, "serves at my pleasure. They are consulted when I choose to consult them, and their opinions matter when I choose to value them. In this case I chose neither. My daughter's guardian was selected by me, for reasons that concern only me, and the council's approval was not required. Is that clear enough for you, Domhnall?" The Northern Council head paled slightly, understanding that he'd just been put firmly in his place. "Of course, Alpha King. Forgive my impertinence." He bowed stiffly and retreated, but Ailsa saw the fury in his eyes as he walked away. "You've made an enemy," she murmured to Alistair. "I've had that enemy for decades," he replied calmly. "Domhnall supported the faction that killed Catriona. He just doesn't know I know that yet. But he will. Soon." The promise in those words sent a chill down Ailsa's spine. She was beginning to understand that the political maneuvering in Duanbe wasn't just about status and power. It was about survival. About identifying threats before they could strike. About being 3 steps ahead of enemies who smiled to your face while plotting your destruction. She'd spent 3 years learning to survive in the wilderness. Now she'd have to learn to survive in this. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of carefully neutral conversations and watchful eyes. When it finally ended, Ailsa escaped back to her quarters with relief, checking on Sorka and finding the child sleeping peacefully in her warded nursery. She stood in the doorway, watching the gentle rise and fall of Sorka's small chest, and felt the day's events finally crash over her. She'd left behind everything she knew. Had entered a world of impossible power and deadly politics. Had placed herself and Sorka in the center of conflicts she barely understood. And she'd done it all for a child who wasn't even hers by blood. But as Ailsa stood there in the darkness, listening to Sorka's soft breathing, she knew she'd made the right choice. Whatever dangers awaited them in Duanbe, whatever enemies plotted in the shadows, whatever trials they'd have to face, they'd face them together. And that was worth any risk. Behind her, a presence materialized so silently that her Omega nature registered it before her conscious mind did. She spun to find Alistair standing in her sitting room, having apparently entered through some door she hadn't noticed. "You should knock," she said, proud that her voice barely shook. In my fortress I go where I please, he replied, but there was no arrogance in it. Just statement of fact. I came to warn you. Dumnall will make his move soon. Tonight's confrontation was a test, a way to measure my commitment to protecting you. He'll report back to his allies, and they'll begin planning how to remove you. How do you know? Because it's what I would do. Alistair moved to the window, looking out over the lights of Duanbe the spread below. You're a vulnerability they can exploit. An Omega with no training in court politics, no allies, no power base of your own. If they can discredit you or force me to send you away, they weaken my position significantly. Then why did you bring me? Ailsa demanded, frustration bubbling up. If I'm such a liability, why not leave me in my cottage and just take Sorka? Alistair turned to face her, and the intensity in his golden eyes stole her breath. Because my daughter needs you more than she needs safety. Because you're the only person in this fortress who looks at her and sees a child instead of a political pawn. And because... He paused, seeming to wrestle with something before continuing. Because I need someone I can trust absolutely. And you're the only wolf I've met in 100 years who wants nothing from me except to protect what we both love. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Ailsa felt her Omega nature stir again, responding to his proximity and his honesty in ways that terrified her. I can't be what you need, she whispered. I'm broken, Alistair. The rejection bond damaged something fundamental in me. I'm not whole enough to. You're whole enough. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping just close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You're whole enough to save a dying child. Whole enough to sacrifice yourself to keep her warm. Whole enough to face down the Alpha King himself and demand answers. If that's what broken looks like, then I'll take broken over perfect any day. Ailsa's breath caught in her throat. She knew she should step back, should maintain distance, should remember all the reasons why this could never work. But she was so tired of being alone. So tired of carrying everything by herself. So tired of pretending she didn't need anyone. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now you learn to survive in my world, Alistair said. Now you become stronger than they think possible. Now you show them that a rejected Omega can be more dangerous than any Alpha if she has the right motivation. He reached out and placed one hand over her heart, right where the rejection bond ached. And now you let me help you heal this, because if you die from it, my daughter loses the only mother she's ever truly known. Before Ailsa could respond, before she could even process what he was offering, Sorka's cry split the air. Not a normal child's cry, but something otherworldly and terrified that sent both of them racing toward the nursery. They found the child sitting up in bed, her eyes glowing pure gold, her small body trembling with power that shouldn't be possible for someone so young. They're coming, Sorka whispered, her voice layered with harmonics that made the walls vibrate. The dark wolves. The ones who hurt Mother. They're coming for me. Alistair moved with speed that blurred, scooping Sorka into his arms even as his power flooded the room. Silver light exploded from his skin, forming protective barriers around all 3 of them. How close? He demanded. Close. Sorka's eyes found Ailsa across the room. They followed your scent. Followed the blood you left in the snow. They know where I am now. Horror washed through Ailsa. The night she'd bled to keep Sorka warm. The night her wolf form had hemorrhaged from the stress of maintaining heat against the killing cold. She'd left a trail. A trail of Omega blood mixed with protective magic and desperation, leading straight to the child she'd been trying to save. And now the very wolves who'd murdered Catriona had followed that trail right to the heart of Duanbe. The wards, Ailsa started. Won't hold against what's coming, Alistair interrupted grimly. These wolves carry old magic, the kind that was banned 500 years ago for good reason. They're not just trying to kill my daughter. They're trying to consume her power, to absorb what makes her special and use it to overthrow everything I've built. An explosion rocked the fortress, so powerful that Ailsa was thrown to her knees. Through the window, she saw silver flames erupting along the outer walls, saw shadows moving with impossible speed toward the royal residence. The attack she'd feared, the danger she'd known was coming. It was happening now, hours after her arrival, before she'd had time to prepare or plan or do anything except exist in the Alpha King's court. "Take her," Alistair commanded, pressing Sorka into Ailsa's arms. "There's a hidden passage behind the hearth in your sitting room. It leads down to the mountain's heart, to chambers that predate this fortress by 1,000 years. Take my daughter there and don't come out until I come for you myself." "What about you?" Ailsa demanded, clutching Sorka tight. "I'm going to remind these wolves why I'm called the Alpha King." His smile was terrible and beautiful. "I'm going to show them what happens when you threaten what's mine. Now go." Ailsa ran, her bare feet silent on the stone floors, Sorka's weight solid and real in her arms. She found the hidden passage exactly where Alistair said it would be, the hearth swinging open to reveal stairs descending into darkness. Behind her, she heard the sounds of battle erupting throughout the fortress. Howls of rage and pain, the crash of stone being shattered, the distinctive scent of blood and silver magic mixing in the air. She descended the stairs 2 at a time, following the path that spiraled deeper into the mountain. The air grew colder, older, filled with power that predated pack sovereignty and council laws. These were the old places, where the first wolves had built their strongholds before civilization had tamed their wild natures. And somewhere in these depths, Ailsa was supposed to hide and wait while Alistair fought a battle that might cost him everything. The passage opened into a vast chamber lit by crystals that glowed with their own internal light. Ancient symbols covered the walls, telling stories in a language Ailsa couldn't read but somehow understood on an instinctive level. Stories of power and sacrifice. Of wolves who'd given everything to protect what they loved. Of omegas who'd proven stronger than any alpha because they fought not for dominance but for survival. Ailsa set Sorka down gently, checking to make sure the child was unharmed. Those strange gold eyes watched her with unsettling awareness. "You have to go back," Sorka whispered. "Father needs you." The dark wolves brought something. Something that hurts him. "I can't leave you," Ailsa protested. "I promise to keep you safe. I'm safe here." Sorka placed her small hand over Ailsa's heart again, and the rejection bond flared with sudden intensity. "But father isn't. They're using omega blood to poison him. Old blood. Dead blood. Blood that makes alphas weak." Understanding crashed through Ailsa with sickening clarity. The dark wolves had come prepared specifically to neutralize Alistair's power. They'd brought weapons designed to target an alpha's connection to omega instincts, to turn protective impulses into vulnerabilities. And if Alistair fell, if the Alpha King was defeated in his own fortress, then Sorka would have no one to protect her except a rejected omega with no power and a broken bond. Unless the very thing that made Ailsa weak could somehow be turned into a weapon. Unless her rejection bond, that constant source of agony and limitation, could be used against the wolves who thought omega blood was just another tool to exploit. "Stay here," Ailsa commanded, pressing a kiss to Sorka's forehead. "Don't leave this chamber for anyone except your father or me. Do you understand?" Sorka nodded solemnly, and Ailsa turned and ran back up the spiraling stairs. She had no plan, no strategy, no idea what she could possibly do against wolves who carried forbidden magic. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wouldn't let Alistair face them alone. She wouldn't hide in the depths while he fought for their daughter's life. She'd survived 3 years of slow death from a rejection bond. If she was going to die anyway, she'd die doing something that mattered. The fortress was chaos when Ailsa emerged. Wolves fought in every corridor, blood staining the beautiful floors, the scent of death thick in the air. She followed the sounds of the fiercest battle, guided by instinct and desperation, until she found herself in the great hall where she'd dined just hours before. The high table was destroyed, the ancient columns cracked and leaking silver light. And in the center of it all, Alistair fought against 6 wolves whose eyes glowed with sickly green light. They moved with unnatural speed, their claws dripping with something that looked like oil but smelled like decay. And every time they struck him, every time their poisoned weapons made contact, Ailsa saw Alistair weaken further. One of the dark wolves held a vial filled with dark liquid, chanting words in that ancient language Ailsa had seen written in the deep chamber. Omega blood. Dead Omega blood. Harvested from wolves who'd been killed by rejection bonds just like hers. They were using it as a weapon, using the concentrated pain and despair and loss to poison an alpha's protective instincts. Ailsa felt her rejection bond pulse with recognition. It knew that blood, knew the agony that had created it. And suddenly, she understood what she had to do. She walked into the great hall without hesitation, without fear. Her bare feet leaving bloody prints on the stone from where she'd cut them on broken glass. The dark wolves noticed her immediately, their attention shifting from Alistair to this new threat that wasn't a threat at all. Another Omega, one of them laughed, his voice thick with contempt. Come to watch your alpha fall. Come to see what happens when legends die. No, Ailsa said clearly, her voice carrying through the ruined hall. I've come to show you what happens when you underestimate a rejected Omega who has nothing left to lose. She reached up and pressed both hands over her heart, over the rejection bond that had been slowly killing her for 3 years. And then she pulled on all that pain, all that agony, all that concentrated poison that had been building in her system since the moment Ewan had spoken those devastating words. Pulled it out of herself and into the air between her and the dark wolves. The rejection bond manifested as visible darkness, black tendrils that writhed from her chest like living things. They reached toward the vial of dead Omega blood, recognizing kindred magic, and suddenly Ailsa understood the truth. Rejection bonds didn't just poison the Omega who carried them. They poisoned everything they touched. They were weapons of pure emotional devastation, and she'd been carrying one inside her for 3 years. The dark wolves realized their mistake too late. The Omega blood in their vial resonated with Ailsa's rejection bond, creating a feedback loop that turned their weapon against them. The black tendrils wrapped around them, feeding on their shock and fear and sudden understanding that they'd brought a rejected Omega into the same space as their carefully harvested poison. They screamed as the rejection magic consumed them, as 3 years of Ailsa's agony poured into their systems and showed them exactly what it felt like to be unwanted, unmated, rejected by everyone you'd ever loved. They fell one by one, their bodies convulsing, their eyes rolling back as the poison they'd meant for Alistair destroyed them instead. When the last one collapsed, Ailsa dropped to her knees, gasping for breath. The rejection bond was still there, still aching in her chest, but it felt different now. Lighter. As if by using it as a weapon, by acknowledging its power instead of trying to suppress it, she'd somehow changed its fundamental nature. Alistair was at her side instantly, his hands gentle as he lifted her chin to look at him. Blood covered his face and arms, but his golden eyes were clear and sharp with concern. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I weaponized my weakness," Ailsa whispered. "I turned the thing that was killing me into the thing that saved you. You could have died." His voice shook with emotion she'd never heard from him. "If you'd pulled too much of that poison out too fast, your heart could have stopped. You could have destroyed yourself along with them. Would that have been so terrible?" The words escaped before Ailsa could stop them, revealing the depth of despair she usually kept hidden. "I'm dying anyway. The bond is killing me slowly. At least this way, I could have died protecting something that mattered." Alistair's hands cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You matter," he said fiercely. "Not because you protect my daughter, not because you proved useful in battle, but because you're you. Because you're brave and fierce and more powerful than you ever believed possible. And I won't lose you. Not to dark wolves, not to a rejection bond, and not to your own despair." Before Ailsa could respond, before she could process what he was saying, Alistair leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. It wasn't a kiss, not really. It was something else. Something that felt like a promise and a claim and a vow all wrapped into one gesture. And as his lips touched her skin, Ailsa felt the rejection bond in her chest shudder and crack. Pain exploded through her system, so intense she couldn't even scream. But beneath the pain was something else. Something warm and golden that felt like healing. Like the beginning of a bond that was nothing like the one that had destroyed her. This was different. Chosen. Mutual. Born not of obligation or pack politics but of genuine connection between two wolves who'd both learned to survive in impossible circumstances. "What are you doing?" she gasped when she could breathe again. "Giving you a choice," Alistair said quietly. "The rejection bond is breaking because your body recognizes the possibility of something new, something real. But I won't force it on you. I won't claim you unless you want to be claimed. So I'm asking Ailsa MacLeith, do you want to carry this bond alone, or do you want to let me help you carry it?" Ailsa looked up at the Alpha King, this ancient powerful being who just offered her a choice no Alpha had ever offered an Omega. Not a command. Not an obligation. Choice. And she realized that everything she'd been running from, everything she'd feared about bonds and mates and belonging, had been based on the wrong foundation. Ewan had claimed her because duty demanded it. Alistair was offering to claim her because he saw value in who she was. "I choose." But before she could finish, the great hall doors exploded inward one final time. And through the smoke and debris walked a figure Ailsa recognized with sick horror. Morag MacCailian, flanked by a dozen council members, all of them armed and radiating hostile intent. "How convenient," Morag said, her ice-blue eyes taking in the scene before her. The Alpha King, compromised and bleeding, about to form a mate bond with a rejected Omega while his fortress burns around him. "The Council has seen enough. By the ancient laws of pack sovereignty, we hereby invoke the right of challenge. You are unfit to rule, Alistair MacBeatha. And we claim the right to remove you by force." The words hung in the air like poison. Ailsa felt Alistair stiffen beside her, felt his power surge as he prepared to face this new threat. But she could also feel how weak he was from the battle, how much the Dark Wolf's poison had taken from him, how close he was to collapse. "You can't," Ailsa said, rising unsteadily to her feet. "He just defended this fortress against an attack that would have destroyed it. He killed the Dark Wolves who've been plotting against him for years. How can you possibly claim he's unfit?" "Because he's about to mate bond with you," Domhnall Macawid said, stepping forward from the group of council members. "A rejected Omega with no clan, no status, no value to the pack. It proves what we've suspected for years, that our king has gone soft, that he's more interested in sentiment than strength. And the pack cannot afford such weakness." Alistair moved to stand in front of Ailsa, protective even in his weakened state. "If you challenge me, you challenge the full weight of my authority. Are you prepared for that, Domhnall? Are all of you prepared to face the consequences of treason?" "It's not treason," Morag said smoothly. "It's the exercise of rights guaranteed by the oldest laws we have. If a king is deemed unfit, the council may challenge him. If he cannot defeat the challenge, he forfeits his crown. Those are the rules you agreed to uphold when you took power 200 years ago." The trap was perfect, Ailsa realized with growing horror. They'd waited until Alistair was weak, injured, poisoned by Omega blood and exhausted from battle. They'd timed their challenge for the exact moment when he had the least chance of winning. And they'd used her, her presence and her potential bond with him, as the excuse they needed to justify their betrayal. "When?" Alistair asked flatly. "Now," Morag said. "By the laws of challenge, combat must occur within the hour of invocation. You have until the moon reaches its zenith to face your challenger in formal combat. If you refuse, you forfeit by default." Ailsa's mind raced, trying to find some loophole, some way to delay or prevent this. But she could see from Alistair's expression that there was no escape. The laws were absolute. The challenge had been properly issued, and he would have to fight or lose everything. "Who challenges me?" Alistair asked, though Ailsa suspected he already knew. "I do." Ewan MacCailian stepped forward from behind his mother, and Ailsa's heart stopped. He looked different than he had in her cottage, harder and more determined. His amber eyes found hers across the hall, and she saw apology there, and regret and terrible resolve. I challenge you for the crown, Alpha King. And I do it not out of ambition, but out of duty to a pack that deserves better than a king who would sacrifice sovereignty for sentiment. The words were a knife in Ailsa's chest. Ewan was going to try to kill Alistair. Her former mate, the wolf who'd rejected her to save her life, was about to fight the one wolf who'd offered her a future. And she was the excuse they were all using to justify it. No, she whispered, but her voice was lost in the sound of the council members beginning the formal challenge chant. Ancient words that bound both Alpha and Challenger to combat, words that couldn't be taken back once spoken. Alistair turned to look at her one last time. Go to Sorka, he commanded quietly. Get her out of Duan Beath if I fall. Take her somewhere safe and raise her to be better than all of us. You can't fight him, Ailsa protested. You're too weak. The poison will kill me whether I fight or not, Alistair interrupted. At least this way, I go down protecting what matters. He reached out and touched her cheek gently. Thank you, Ailsa MacLeith. Thank you for giving my daughter 6 months of love and safety. Thank you for showing me that not all wolves are motivated by power and politics. And thank you for being brave enough to weaponize your own pain to save me. I won't forget that. Whatever happens in the challenge, I won't forget. Then he turned and walked toward the center of the great hall, where space was being cleared for the formal combat. Ailsa stood frozen, watching him go, feeling the rejection bond in her chest pulse with new pain. Not the old pain of being unwanted, but the fresh agony of potentially losing something before she'd even had a chance to claim it. Ewan approached her, his expression carefully neutral. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know you don't understand, but this is the only way to save you both. If Alistair wins, he'll be too weak to rule afterward, and the Dark Wolf's allies will tear him apart. But if I win, if I take the crown, I can protect you. I can give you the status you deserve and keep Sorka safe. I can fix the mistake I made 3 years ago, by killing the man who showed me kindness when everyone else saw weakness. Ailsa's voice was cold. By destroying the one chance Sorka has at having a father who actually loves her. That's how you plan to fix your mistake. I'm trying to save your life, Ewan hissed. Why can't you see that? Why can't you understand that everything I've done, every choice I've made, has been to protect you from forces you don't understand? Then stop protecting me. The words exploded from Ailsa with years of pent-up frustration. Stop making decisions for me. Stop assuming I'm too weak or too stupid or too omega to choose my own path. I would rather die standing beside someone who respects me than live under the protection of someone who sees me as a problem to be managed. Ewan flinched as if she'd struck him. You've changed, he said quietly. No, Ailsa corrected. I've finally become who I always was beneath the expectations and the pack laws and the pressure to be a good obedient omega. You rejected that girl 3 years ago. This is who survived the rejection. Before Ewan could respond, the challenge horn sounded, its deep note reverberating through the ruined great hall. The combat was beginning. Ailsa pushed past him, moving to the edge of the cleared space, and felt her heart break as she watched Alistair and Ewan face each other in the ancient ritual of alpha dominance. They circled slowly, both in human form still, testing each other's weaknesses. Alistair moved with visible effort, his injuries from the earlier battle slowing him down. Ewan moved with the confidence of a wolf in his prime, fresh and uninjured and ready for combat. The outcome seemed inevitable. But then Alistair smiled, and Ailsa saw something in that expression that gave her hope. You think this is about strength, the Alpha King said quietly. You think if you're faster and fresher you'll win. But you've forgotten the most important lesson about power, Macalean. It's not about physical strength. It's about will. And I have survived 200 years of challenges not because I'm the strongest alpha alive, but because I'm willing to pay prices others won't. Ewan struck first, a blur of movement that should have connected with Alistair's throat. But the king wasn't there anymore. He'd moved with speed that shouldn't be possible for someone in his condition, repositioning behind Yuan and striking a blow that sent the younger Alpha stumbling forward. Not a killing blow. Teaching blow. One meant to illustrate exactly how outmatched Yuan truly was. The combat continued, brutal and elegant in turns, and Ailsa watched with her heart in her throat. Every blow Alistair landed came at a cost, she could see that. Every movement drew on reserves he didn't have, burned through energy he couldn't replenish. He was winning, but he was also dying. The poison from the dark wolves combined with the exertion of combat was destroying him from the inside out. Yuan realized it too. Ailsa saw the moment understanding dawned in his amber eyes, saw him shift tactics from trying to win to simply trying to survive. Because if he could last long enough, the poison would do his work for him. Alistair would fall, not from Yuan's claws but from his own body's betrayal. "No," Ailsa whispered, and then louder, "No." She didn't consciously decide to move. Her body simply acted, carrying her into the combat circle in direct violation of every law that governed formal challenges. Gasps erupted from the watching council members. Morag shouted something that might have been a warning or a threat. But Ailsa ignored them all, running toward Alistair as he stumbled, his knees finally giving out from the poison coursing through his system. She reached him just as he started to fall, catching him and taking his weight even though he was twice her size. His golden eyes found hers, confused and fading. "What are you doing?" he rasped. "Choosing," Ailsa said fiercely. "You asked me to choose, and I'm choosing you. I'm choosing Sorka. I'm choosing the life you offered me even if it only lasts 5 more minutes. And I'm choosing to use this thrice-damned rejection bond one more time before it kills me." She pressed both hands over her heart again, over the bond that was already cracking and reforming into something new. And this time, instead of pulling the poison out of herself, she pushed it into Alistair. Not to hurt him. To burn away the poison the dark wolves had left in his system. To use her Omega blood, her rejection magic, her weaponized pain as a cleansing fire that could purge what shouldn't be there. It was agony beyond anything she'd experienced. Worse than the initial rejection. Worse than 3 years of slow death. Worse than the night she'd bled to keep Sorka warm. This was every moment of pain distilled into a single burning instant, and Ailsa screamed as it tore through her. But it worked. She felt Alistair's body convulse in her arms, felt the dark poison being forced out by the concentrated rejection magic, felt his strength starting to return as the two magics warred for dominance within his system. Her pain versus their poison. Her desperation versus their calculation. Her love versus their ambition. And love, fierce and desperate and absolute, won. Alistair gasped and jerked upright, his eyes clearing, his power flooding back with devastating force. He rose to his full height, lifting Ailsa with him, and the silver light that had always marked his presence exploded outward with enough force to send everyone in the hall staggering backward. Yuan was thrown across the room, slamming into the far wall. The council members fell to their knees, unable to withstand the sheer power radiating from their king. "The challenge," Alistair said, his voice resonating with absolute authority, "is over. Have won. Not through combat, but through the sacrifice of an Omega who proved stronger than any Alpha in this room. And now I will tell you all exactly what is going to happen next." He looked around the hall, his golden eyes promising retribution. "Morag MacCailian, you are stripped of your title as Luna and banished from Pac lands for orchestrating this betrayal. Dumnall Macawid, you and your Northern Council are dissolved, your territories forfeit to wolves who understand the meaning of loyalty. And Yuan MacCailian." Alistair's gaze found the younger Alpha struggling to rise from where he'd fallen. "You I will spare, but only because the Omega you rejected has a kinder heart than you deserve. You will return to your clan and live with the knowledge that you could have had her, could have valued her, and chose tradition over treasure. Live with that, MacCailian. Live with knowing that you threw away something irreplaceable because you were too blind to see its value." Yuan's face crumpled, and Ailsa saw true devastation there. But she felt nothing. No satisfaction in his pain, no vindication for her own. Just emptiness where her feelings for him used to be. Alistair turned his attention back to the assembled wolves. Let it be known throughout the realm, Ailsa Macleith is no longer a rejected Omega. She is my acknowledged mate, bonded to me through choice and sacrifice and magic that predates any law this council has ever written. She is Luna of Duanbe, the mother to my heir, and anyone who questions her authority answers to me. Is that understood? The chorus of "Yes, Alpha King" that filled the hall was immediate and absolute. Even those who'd plotted against him knew better than to argue with a king who'd just proven unkillable. But Ailsa barely heard them, because the rejection bond in her chest had finally, completely shattered. And in its place, growing like silver fire through her veins, was something new. Mate bond. Real and chosen and terrifyingly powerful. She felt Alistair through it, felt his relief and his pain and his fierce protective love for both her and Sorka. And beneath all of that, she felt his absolute certainty that this was right. That they were right. That somehow, against all odds and expectations, they'd found something worth fighting for. Ailsa. Alistair's voice was gentle, so different from the commanding tone he'd just used with the council. Are you all right? She looked up at him, this ancient powerful being who'd chosen her, and felt tears streaming down her face. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know what I am anymore. I'm not the rejected Omega I was. But I don't know how to be what you need me to be either. Then we'll learn together, he said simply, pulling her close. We'll make mistakes and fix them and make new ones. We'll navigate court politics and raise my daughter and probably scandalize every tradition this fortress holds sacred. But we'll do it together. Is that enough? Ailsa thought about her cottage in the wilderness. Thought about 3 years of surviving alone. Thought about the night she'd found Sorka dying in the snow and made a choice that had led her here, to this moment, to this impossible future. It's more than enough, she whispered. It's everything. And as Alistair bent to kiss her, as the mate bond sealed itself with a rush of silver magic that lit up the ruined great hall like dawn breaking, Ailsa finally understood what she'd been searching for all along. Not acceptance from a pack that would never value her. Not status or power or vindication. Just this. Just the simple, terrible, beautiful gift of being chosen by someone who saw her completely and chose her anyway. The wolves of Duanbe would talk about this night for generations. About the rejected Omega who'd weaponized her own pain to save the Alpha King. About the formal challenge that had ended not with death but with an unprecedented mate bond. About the moment everything changed, when the old order crumbled and something new took its place. But Ailsa would remember something else. She would remember running through ancient passages to retrieve Sorka, holding the little girl while Alistair healed fully from his injuries. She would remember the first night in her new role as Luna, sitting between Alistair and Sorka at the high table while the fortress slowly accepted that yes, this was happening, yes, she belonged here. She would remember learning to navigate politics she didn't understand, making allies from unexpected places, growing into power she'd never imagined holding. And she would remember, most vividly of all, the morning 3 weeks later when she woke to find Sorka standing by her bedside, those strange gold eyes watching her with solemn intensity. Mama, the child said clearly, speaking in full sentences for the first time since Ailsa had found her. Mama, there's something you need to know. Something about who I really am. Something that changes everything. Ailsa sat up slowly, her heart beginning to race with instinctive dread. What is it, sweetling? Sorka climbed onto the bed, her small face grave. I'm not just father's daughter. I'm the prophecy child. The one the old seers said would either save the wolf realm or destroy it completely. And you, Mama. Her small hand reached out to touch Ailsa's cheek. You're the rejected Omega who was supposed to kill me. The legend said a rejected wolf would find me and end my life before my power could wake. That's why Mother left me at the boundary stones. She was testing the prophecy, seeing if fate could be changed. Cold horror washed through Ailsa. What are you saying? I'm saying the prophecy isn't done, Sorka whispered. I'm saying that every vision the seers had ends the same way, with you standing over my body, a blade in your hand, and the realm burning around us. I'm saying that no matter how much you love me, no matter how much you want to protect me, fate has other plans." The child's eyes began to glow that impossible gold, and Ailsa saw visions reflected in them. Saw herself older, harder, standing in a burning city with a knife clutched in her blood-stained hands. Saw Sorka lying at her feet, those strange eyes finally closed forever. Saw Alistair's anguished howl splitting the smoke-filled sky. Saw the wolf realm tearing itself apart in the aftermath of the prophecies' fulfillment. "No," Ailsa breathed, but the visions continued, showing her moment after moment, choice after choice, all of them leading to the same devastating conclusion. The rejected Omega who became Luna. The child who was loved but not saved. The prophecy that couldn't be denied. Sorka's small hand squeezed hers gently. "I just wanted you to know," the child said softly. "Before it's too late. Before we're in too deep. You can still walk away, Mama. You can still save yourself." And as Ailsa stared into those prophetic eyes, holding the hand of a child she'd died to protect, feeling the mate bond connecting her to an alpha king who'd chosen her against all wisdom, she understood the truth. The prophecy wasn't about saving or destroying the realm. It was about choice. About what an Omega would do when faced with an impossible decision. About whether love could change fate, or if fate would use love to destroy everything it touched. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And somewhere in the shadows of Duan Bithe, forces she didn't yet understand were already moving, already planning, already preparing for the moment when prophecy and reality would collide and Ailsa would have to choose between the child she loved and the realm she'd sworn to protect. But that was a battle for another day. For now, for this moment, Ailsa pulled Sorka close and whispered the only truth that mattered. "Then we'll change the prophecy. Together. Because I didn't survive 3 years of death just to lose you to fate's cruelty. The seers don't know everything. And they certainly don't know what a rejected Omega is capable of when she finally has something worth fighting for." Behind them, dawn broke over Duan Bithe, painting the fortress in shades of gold and crimson. And in that light, Ailsa saw their reflection in the window. Luna and heir, Omega and prophecy child, mother and daughter bound by choice and love and terrible destiny. The realm would burn or be saved. The prophecy would be fulfilled or shattered. And Ailsa MacLeith, the rejected Omega who'd bled all night to keep a toddler warm, would stand at the center of it all and prove that sometimes the weakest wolf can be the most dangerous. Because she had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And that, more than any prophecy or power or ancient magic, was what would decide the fate of them all.